The issue is different from the last time that we talked. The last time we talked about judging others. This time we're going to be talking about other people judging us. And how do we handle that? I got a question from a client, and I'll read it to you. It says, I'm dealing with work stress and feeling less than some of my colleagues who are self-important. How do I work in an environment that judges me? It's really hard. So that was a question that I got from a client of mine, and this is what I said to her. And I'll kind of give you my bullet points and kind of give you a little coloration on it in addition to what I talked to her about. First, I think we got to understand that we cannot change the other people. We live in a free will universe. That means people have choice. That means we cannot change them. So first of all, we understand that we cannot change them. Secondly, what we can change and what we do have control over is ourselves. So what does that mean? That means that we can spend time working on ourselves internally and doing the best we can to try to strengthen ourselves from the inside out. So that's the message you hear me often talk about, not just with meditation. Of course, that is a great technique to turn within and to strengthen ourselves from the inside out, but also doing other internal practices that may help us feel stronger and more self-confident from inside. And that, of course, includes living a balanced life, which you hear me talking about, eating well, hanging out with good supportive people, working out, exercising regularly, all of that good stuff, getting enough sleep, etc. And basically what that'll do is it'll gradually create more of a buffer, so to speak, kind of create a reservoir within ourselves of strength that then we can draw from when we are in those, what my client was describing, those kind of intense situations where people are like all over you and judging you and kind of laying their trips on you, basically. You know, it's their stuff. The first thing to realize is it's their stuff, it's not your stuff, okay? So to draw that line clearly. But still, you got to deal with it, right? Intellectually and emotionally. So that's the first thing. Understand that it's their stuff. Don't make their judgmental attitudes towards you, in other words, yours. And yes, you know, I understand we live in a practical world, you know, in the world in a practical way. And yeah, we have to deal with people in the workplace like that. And we need to perform, we need to meet certain performance metrics and all of that stuff. That's fine. But what I'm talking about is more internally. How do we assess things and what can we do internally? Because that's what we have more control over than, as I said at the outset, than their behavior and their attitude towards us. First thing I think we need to understand is that their self-importance is a sign of weakness. So it's not a sign of their strength. So when you have people bullying you or pushing you around and so forth, judging you in that way, the very first thing you got to recognize, don't fall into their narrative. Their narrative is, oh, I'm so strong, I'm so powerful, I can push you around. No, they're doing it because they are actually weak. And when people feel the need to exhibit that type of self-importance, it's because they're not feeling confident inside. That's where it stems from. So first of all, you need to intellectually, just self-reflect quickly, recognize it for what it is. So basically what they're doing is they're making themselves feel more important and secure inside. And how do they do that? They do that by making you and other people outside of them feel less secure, feel more insecure, feel weaker than they are, and thereby by depressing you and other people around them, it raises them up and makes them feel stronger. So it's kind of a weird thing that's going on, but if you think about it, you pause and you reflect, you see that's exactly what's going on. These are weak people foisting themselves on you, using you as their prey to try to make themselves feel emotionally stronger by making you feel weaker. We see it all the time in life, and it's unfortunate, but we need to recognize it for what it is and don't internalize their stuff. It's their stuff. I call this syndrome the importance of being important, and it's the basis of cruel behavior. For those of you who, you're watching this obviously on Facebook now. I'm going to put this on YouTube, but if you subscribe to my YouTube channel, you'll scroll down in the YouTube, and you'll see a long talk I did on this, on transcending cruelty, how to deal with people who are cruel towards you. So, as I said, it's the basis for cruel behavior, that kind of thinking. So that's step number one. Realize it's their stuff, realize where it's coming from. And then the second step, I think, is this. I call it the castle and moat analogy. Okay? In these kind of behavioral situations, think about yourself this way. We are all sovereign entities. I say we, what I mean by that is our minds, our consciousnesses, who we are. We are sovereign entities. What does that mean? It's kind of like we're castles. The old medieval castles. So it's like we're a castle. It's like you picture yourself as a castle, and you have a moat around it. And you can even have alligators in it if you want. I don't think they had alligators in Europe. It's too cold. But anyway, you got water in it. You have a moat around the castle, and it has water in it, right? And you have a drawbridge that you can pull up and down. That's the visual image I give my clients to think about. We are sovereign entities. What does that mean? We are separate and distinct minds from everybody else. So back to the workplace example that my client was asking me about. Not only do we recognize that we are separate and distinct entities, but we can act on that. We can act on that in the following way. We act on it. We always have the ability. We always have the choice as sovereign entities, as sovereign minds, as individual minds, to pull up that drawbridge and not let other people into our minds and our hearts emotionally. Okay, mentally and emotionally. We always have that ability. Now, they may or may not notice it, because if they're so caught up in banging on you and kind of putting you down, then they're probably not very sensitive people. So they're not even going to notice what you're doing. But my point is, this is the second step, so you protect yourself. All right? Because sometimes in toxic environments, it's necessary to do that, and I would argue it's even advisable to do that. And moreover, it's especially important to do this when you are a sensitive person. When you are sensitive, intuitive, especially if you have empathic qualities. You are an empath. This is the biggest lesson, one of the biggest challenges, I would argue, and needs for empaths is to learn how to draw boundaries. And this analogy that I'm using of pulling up the drawbridge, you are a castle with a moat around you. Pull up the drawbridge. Don't let people everybody across the drawbridge. You are the person who decides. Your mind decides. That's what I mean when you're a sovereign entity. You make the choices. Who do you let into your life? Who do you let into your mind, even mentally and emotionally, even if you have to physically be with them at work and they are toxic? You can decide to do this. It's not easy to do, but you can do it. It's not easy always at work, is what I'm saying. I understand. You got to interact with people sometimes. I've been in situations like this myself, so I know from personal experience. But again, you're the one in control of the drawbridge. You can pull that up anytime you want. All right? I think there's a big problem here in spiritual communities also, that where this whole new age or spiritual community notion that's popular today of oneness, this whole idea of oneness, I think is hugely problematic in this area that we're talking about. I think it's problematic generally, but I think specifically we can talk about how problematic it is here in the area that we're talking about in terms of drawing boundaries and drawing lines. It does not mean that you are not a loving person if you are drawing boundaries and pulling up your drawbridge. Because you need to love yourself, number one, first. Right? We are all self-interested. We need to self-love first. Self-interest is a neutral term, It's neutral emotionally as far as I'm concerned. Self-interest is not the same as being selfish. Everybody's self-interested. If we don't look out for ourselves, who looks out for ourselves? So we have to look out for ourselves. We are all self-interested, but when we become too self-interested, then we become selfish, okay? That's what selfish is. Selfish is the negative. Self-absorbed is even more extreme than being selfish, okay? But self-interested is important, and self-love is what more self-interest thing can we do than to love ourselves? So back to this idea of oneness, I think I don't want to get into a whole discussion about oneness. That's a whole separate thing. We'll maybe do a quick Facebook Live on another time. But the idea that we're all one just because we may share atoms and molecules with everybody, we're all made of atoms and molecules, doesn't mean that we are all the same. Being connected does not mean sameness. Similarity does not mean losing identity of oneself. Okay, so that's enough that I'm not going to say a lot on that in terms of the oneness thing, but we are each distinct eternal beings, unique and separate from each other. That's the point we want to take away from today's discussion about when others judge us. We are distinct from them. We are unique and separate from them. The fact that we may feel connected to them sometimes does not mean that we are the same as them. And the fact that we draw boundaries sometimes does not mean that we are not a loving person. First, number one, we have to love and take care of ourselves. Okay? Bottom line, I think this whole notion of oneness that's kind of gotten conflated and confused and is very popular in spiritual communities these days, I think it derives from a deep feeling of loneliness, which creates this popular notion of oneness. But again, how do we eliminate loneliness? We do that by turning within, by strengthening ourselves, because the more connected we are with ourselves, the less loneliness, the less dependent we are on other people to fill voids within us. And those of you who are in the relationship field know that a strong relationship is based on strong sense of self in each of the people in the relationship who come together. It's not there to fill a void for the other person, because that inevitably will break down, because the other person eventually resents that. Again, a whole other topic for another Facebook Live. Again, friendship and connection are not the same as oneness. That's where people go awry and get confused. So that's all to say that this drawbridge analogy is completely appropriate and correct thinking for us to deal with others when they are judging us. It's a good practical advice to draw boundaries when we're with toxic people. So when I say toxic, there are different degrees of toxicity. So some people are maybe judging us in a way that is, we may not call it toxic, but it's judging our internal life. They're judging our internal motives, for example. And it doesn't feel right to us. It doesn't feel good and supportive to us. That's what I'm talking about. So if that's the test. That's the test. So toxic may be too strong a word, but if you are in a toxic environment, which is what my client was describing to me that she was in, absolutely you need to pull up this drawbridge. So when others are judging us in that way, our internal motives or our external actions, when they're in this judgmental kind of mode, we need to pull up a drawbridge. They could still talk. They may be coming from a good place even. It may be a family member who's coming from a good place and giving us suggestions, ideas, advice. But sometimes we might just need to pull a drawbridge up even in that situation where it's less toxic, but we need to protect ourselves because it's not what we need to hear at that moment, perhaps. Okay? Here's the thing. Only you are the judge of yourself. And even then, none of us is infallible. None of us is perfect. None of us is always right about ourselves. We're all eternal beings. We're all figuring this out. Eternity, like Woody Allen said, eternity is a really long time, especially near the end. And so, eternity, it's a joke, right, people? Because eternity has no beginning and it has no end. That's what eternity means. So if we're around for a long time, give yourself a break. Loving ourselves means cutting ourselves some slack too. So when we pull up the drawbridge, here's the last point I want to leave you with. When we pull up the drawbridge and we're in that situation and we consciously choose to pull up the drawbridge and don't let people across, then we need, and we turn within to look within ourselves to see what about inside ourselves, to strengthen ourselves, can we strengthen ourselves about, and so forth. In that situation, we need to do that not only with a clear thinking mind, but we need to do it with a gentle heart as well. What do I mean by that? Don't be too hard on yourself when you turn within. Okay? And another slight coloration on this analogy, the drawbridge analogy, is that you can still communicate with people after having pulled up the drawbridge from the top of your castle. You can still communicate with people, but you've drawn your emotions in, so to speak. You've drawn your emotions across into your castle. So it doesn't mean that you have no communication. It's how you are communicating. That's what I'm suggesting in this drawbridge analogy. You are not exposing all of your emotional self to the other person at that time. That may be necessary at times for you to pull yourself back, pull yourself more within, regroup, and then re-engage. Let the drawbridge down, maybe re-engage. Okay? I hope that's been helpful. Just another thoughts of the day. Okay? Take care. Have a great rest of your evening. Take care. Bye-bye.